Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Phil Edgell. I'm the president of Vantage, a guest journey-driven platform which is designed to enhance guest experiences and drive operational efficiency. Today I'm doing a talk in one take on data, the modern venue's hidden superpower. So let's get started. In 1895, a gentleman by the name of Wilhelm Röntgen accidentally discovered the X-ray. Called the X-ray because he wasn't sure what the radioactive waves he had discovered actually were, but it turned out to be one of the most significant medical discoveries ever made. I think what's most interesting about this discovery is that not only was it an amazing medical discovery on its own, but it was also a discovery that improved all the other medical professions' capabilities to do their job better. Whether you were a dentist or an orthopedic surgeon, broken bones, all of a sudden you literally got insight into the state of the bones inside the human body. In fact, it was so remarkable that in 1901, Röntgen not only received the Nobel Prize, but the very first X-ray, which was of his wife's hand, actually had her declare, "I have seen my future death," which is incredible if you think about the insight that provided for the people of that time, never having seen the actual bones of a body except through a skeleton of a deceased person. So you may be thinking to yourself, why would we start with a discussion of the X-ray when having a conversation about data during an amusement industry conference? Well, I'd contend that it's my belief, just like the X-ray dramatically changed the medical profession, that right here today, we have the opportunity to drive similar kinds of insights into our venue through data. Now, data is not new. This isn't a novel concept, but I do believe that data has not been viewed as the superpower that drives the kind of insight into guest preferences and therefore ability to drive improved guest experiences, or the ability to use data to increase operational efficiency the way it currently can be used. And therefore, this undiscovered capability around data can really drive the modern venue into having this incredible insight, which is really a superpower, not unlike X-ray became the superpower of Superman. So, we talk of X-rays and superpowers. You're probably wondering to yourself, are we going to get to sort of some real life, some real things that we can actually apply inside our venue? So my intent moving forward is actually to walk you through some real life examples of how to enable that data superpower inside your venue. But we got to talk about three big concepts, not novel concepts, but things that are really critical when you think about your overall data strategy and turning that data into a true superpower through insight. So the very first one is collecting. We have to think ahead of time, what is the data that we want, to figure out how do we go and collect it, and some of the strategies associated with collecting the right kind of data. Once we have the data, we have to turn that somehow into information, and that's typically on the analysis process. And then once we have all that great information, really it's only valuable if we can get it into the hands of the right people at the right time. So we're going to talk about collecting, analyzing, and distributing data. And we're going to use some examples outside the amusement park industry and some examples of how we drive that through our platform inside the amusement industry. But first, I think it's really important to discuss why now. As I said at the beginning, just like the X-ray, data is not new. In fact, you might even be sitting there saying to yourself, hidden superpower, we've known about data and had lots of data forever. It's true. Most people we talk to say, we don't need more data. We've got tons of data. We just don't know what to do with the data. So, the why now question really has to do with this context, the concept of the fourth industrial revolution that we're in today. So in the technology sphere, really, we think of this fourth industrial revolution as the blending between the physical, the biological, and the scientific environments all together through digital platforms. And what's created this opportunity for this fourth industrial revolution is a few things. First of all, we can put a sensor to create digital data on almost anything. You think about today in your life, you've got probably a mobile phone. If you've bought some modern appliances recently, you might even have a fridge that's IP enabled. You've got streaming services. You've got so many different devices within your house that create digital data. You might even have a Google device that you can talk to. And all these devices help us create digital trails, both for good and sometimes for evil. The other thing is that I think where the consumer or the guest in the case of the amusement industry is they realize that there's a trade-off. And the trade-off exists between releasing some of your data to get a great service that can be tailored to you. Because if we don't know you, we can't actually provide preferences to you. So, the why now, or why this is important now, or why I think data more so than ever with the right strategy become this hidden superpower is that we've finally arrived at a spot where the technology capture capability exists, the analysis capability exists, and we have a consumer base that is also willing to understand the trade-offs between release of data for increased experience or preference. So let's jump into the concepts of collecting, analyzing, and distributing. So first of all, collecting. It's really about the power of observation. Everybody knows this red N, or most people would know this red N as Netflix. And what's really, really important is to understand the story behind Netflix. I think for most people, they would understand that Netflix, starting in the 90s, used to be a mail-in DVD service, although they always had this vision of streaming. That's why they called it Netflix as opposed to instead of Mailflix. They then moved into streaming at scale, so they were the first and the largest streaming service around the globe. And then most people would also understand that they are also a massive content producer. I think it's this move from streaming to content that illustrates my point about the collection capacity and this trade-off that exists between the consumers and the suppliers probably best. So content, how Netflix builds the content is they're constantly analyzing the habits of their subscribers. So they are looking at, from a big data perspective, what movies are getting watched, what are the topics and themes within the movies, who are the actors within the movies, where do people stop watching certain kinds of movies, and they analyze all this data, and it's really what gives them all of the information they need to know what kind of content they need to build. And then when you put their global scale in place, they also start to understand preferences and how they differ in different geographies. So Netflix is trading. When you subscribe to Netflix, what you're getting is a tremendous service from them for a very reasonable price for a great experience around streaming. And in exchange, what you're giving them is the data about your habits so that they can start to learn how to build content that is going to keep you a subscriber of their service. This is the basic premise of this idea that I'm willing to trade some of my data and my habits in exchange for a great service. And they use that data to keep me interested in the service. So if that's Netflix's principle, how would we translate that into the amusement industry? Well, the very first thing is we have to get guests engaged. When we think about our platform, when we were building our platform, we had to think a lot about what are the attributes or the personas of guests and how would we get them to give us some data and what would we have to trade for them in terms of experiences to get that data. You see, our platform as Vantage has been built as a guest journey platform, but it's all centered around the guest to achieve that. So the very premise is that we have to get them engaged. When we think about engaging them, what we know is that generally speaking, there are many different personas inside of the human species, but generally speaking, they can fall into some pretty broad categories. We did a little test when we were doing the alpha testing of our wearable device at a local resort. We did two tests. First one was we handed out wristbands, but we didn't tell guests anything about what they were for. And they were guests of a resort, but it was just in this one little pool area that had a couple of amusement slides. And what we noticed was that was pushback of actually wearing the wristbands. Only about 50% of guests put the wristband on with no questions, and the other 50% either refused to put it on, or they put it on and quickly took it off, or they asked, why am I putting this on? In the next beta test, what we did was we gave the guests the wristbands, but we told them this wristband specifically is going to be utilized to give you an experience on these attractions where you're going to be able to personalize your music on that particular attraction. We had no one ask us what it was for, obviously, because we told them, and we had over 80% compliance on keeping that band on. Even though the premise is that we would be collecting data around with the music that they chose and how many times the ride was, how many times that slide was ridden. So it just reinforced the fact that when we think about collecting data, in order to get a really rich data set centered around the guest, we have to provide an experience to that guest in exchange for that data. So when we think about the different types of personas that are inside of our base, we think about the collector, for example. So we have a series of badges that if you do these types of tasks and you ride a slide or you go on a roller coaster and maybe you buy some popcorn, that these are all attributes that go into a collector curating a set of experiences and receiving a badge that they can be really proud of. There's also instant gratifiers that it's a do this, get that type of situation. And we can build those into a gamified loyalty point type strategy where, go on a single roller coaster, go on the drop slide, all these thrill oriented things. And we will give you the thrill badge, but we'll also give you points for every single time that you do something. So over and over, they're instantly rewarded. It's that dopamine rush of, here's something for you, instant gratifier. And then we also know that there's people that are really interested in having personalized experiences. So how do we now take a ride that is relatively generic within an amusement park, but make it individualized for every person to experience? So, we can equip amusement rides with music or custom lights so that they can go into the app, choose a preference, and see their preference show up amongst their guests. Now, in order to enable all of those things in the platform, what they need to do is sign up for an account. And in that account, there's different levels of information that they can give us. In fact, in one of the venues that we have our platform, they actually give people points, loyalty points that can be used for redemptions for food or bounce backs or cabana rentals or any of those things. They actually give them points just for filling out more data. So at the very minimum, what we need is your name and your email address. But then you can also give us demographics like zip codes if you're in the US or other attributes about your capabilities or skills, depending on the type of venue that we're in. So when we think about this whole collection strategy, what we realize is that to get a really rich data set, there has to be a trade here. It cannot be a one-sided, we're just collecting your data and you get nothing in return. So as you think about your collection strategy, you have to think about what kind of data do we need or desire. If you don't want any guest data whatsoever, then maybe you don't need to ask the guest for anything. What we need to be doing is setting up, the rides with certain kinds of counters or certain kinds of devices where we don't really care who it is. We just care what happens. In other instances, we really, really care who it is. Therefore, we need to be able to link those activities back to a guest account. Therefore, we need the guest to build an account. Therefore, we have to figure out what is the trade that's required to have that person fill out that data, to fill out that information to build themselves an account. So the collection process is kind of the base strategy, and you have to think in terms of trade-offs between the type of data we're asking for and the type of experiences we have to provide in order to get those individual breadcrumbs of data. So once we get those breadcrumbs of data, we have to think about what we want to do with them. And it's always more valuable to be able to compare data to other types of data. Really, that's what makes it information. A great example from the cycling industry, so a personal passion of mine is riding bikes. One of the ways that you can judge the quality of a bike rider has to do with how much power they can put to their pedals. So really, how strong are your legs? But just knowing that someone can push 280 watts or 260 watts or 400 watts actually isn't enough information to really know anything about how fast a cyclist that person is. Because we know that the biggest thing you have to fight on Earth is gravity. And so the more you weigh, the more gravitational forces are against you. So in order to truly understand and be able to compare riders to each other, you have to not just look at the power output that they have, but it has to be in relation to how much they weigh, because that's the gravitational force that's going to hold them back from being fast. So you have to take their functional power and divide it by their weight. So this is a really long story about something I'm really interested in, can go on for hours. But the point being that by doing that, you get a number that you can then compare all cyclists in the world against each other to make a judgment about how fast someone can be against somebody else, because we are putting these two numbers together that independently on their own in the cycling world wouldn't actually be all that valuable. The same thing happens with the collection of data inside any kind of venue or amusement park. The key idea here is that we have to find insight through disparate pieces of data that we then put together in information. And it's only through this ability to put these pieces of information together that it's really, really valuable. This is a pretty simple example from one of our customers. A simple question. My queue length is 25 minutes. Should I be worried? That's a big depends question. Now, somebody who's been at that park and run it forever and has tons and tons of experience in the amusement park industry can probably answer that question pretty easily. If they know the venue, they know what types of rides there are. At Disney, 25 minutes, that would be fantastic. But maybe at the local water park, 25 minutes might actually not be all that good. So what piece of data could we add to this that would help a less educated person about the process of running some kind of venue know whether these are good numbers or not? So the idea here is now what we've added is we've added attendance. So real-time attendance. So we've got queue length of 25 minutes with an overlay of real-time attendance. So what you can see here in the graph as we move our way from left to right is that very obviously and very naturally, what we see is that as attendance grows, so does the wait time. So the big blue lines are the wait times for a given ride, and the pink line is attendance. Now, what's interesting is between 12 and 1, 12 being the highest column and 1 o'clock being the lowest column, or the next over column, what we realize is that although wait times have dropped very little, attendance has actually dropped quite a bit. So this is where we might start to look at maybe that there's a problem here. Maybe there's a trend line. And so the point of this story really is less to do about whether the 25 minutes in the queue length is too long or not, but more to the point is that just knowing queue length or time in the queue, the relevance of that actual number becomes far more information oriented once we can overlay other types of data. Now, this is a really simple example, a concept that I think is pretty easy for everyone to understand, but there are these kind of examples that exist all over a venue of any type. And the importance is to, when you think about how you're going to build out this analysis strategy, is how do you have a platform? So a platform being a system that not only worries about itself, but also worries about all the systems around it. How do you build a platform that can pull in disparate information to drive new insights into the operational framework of the business? This is a big challenge, and one of the places where Vantage has made a lot of strides, and the benefit we've had of being a relatively new system or platform on the market is that we have started with the concept of integrations as a core competency of what we do. So whether we create the data like we do, in a water park around dispatches, or in a venue that we do around entrances and exits through our strategy of wearables and antennas that we've got, we're also ingesting third-party information. So we don't provide a food and beverage point of sale system, but we can ingest all the food and beverage point of sale information, merge it with our wearable, and do cashless transactions. And all of a sudden, we can start to produce trends around what demographic is buying what kind of food, what's the history of those demographics, so that the food and beverage manager can start to understand, given these conditions, maybe it's weather forecast along with whether school is in or out, we can predict that this is the kind of demographic that's going to come to our venue. And we know that that demographic most often eats hot dogs. So we better order a lot of hot dogs, but you know what? Let's just hold off on the popcorn. Maybe we don't need popcorn, as much popcorn this week. So it's all these insights that are derived of being able to put these disparate sources of data together, whether they are created by the platform or ingested by the platform, to really derive insight from all the data breadcrumbs that we're either creating or ingesting. So, once we've talked about the collection process, we've talked a little bit about the analysis process and how we put these data bits together. Now we got to talk about distribution. So, as the old saying goes, timing is everything. And we firmly believe that as well. If you think about international travel or just travel in general, the best time to learn whether your flight is going to be delayed or canceled is before you've left your home. The worst time to learn whether your flight is delayed or canceled is when at the time it's supposed to be boarding. So just think about that. Flight delayed or canceled, it's the exact same information or data, but it has two different values given when you learn it. High value before you've left your home, much lower value once you're at the airport and already waiting to board the plane. So we got to think about the same strategy as it relates to distributing this information we've just created through all this analysis in the last step. And we have to start to think really carefully about we're collecting this data, we're analyzing it, and now we need to distribute it. We can only get value from it if it's in the hands of the people who need it when they need it most. So when we think about this strategy, we think about it in two different big blocks. We think who needs what kind of data real time for operations, and who needs the data more in a trend format that's looking at it over time. So on the left-hand side, what you can see is from our water park operations app, designed to be on a mobile app in the hands of the operator or the lifeguard manager in any given day. And what it's showing is real-time dispatches across every 10 minutes overlaid with staffing so that we can start to understand the trends. So you can see that the dispatch rates, the speed of dispatch, which is a direct has a direct effect on queue line length, which has a direct effect on customer satisfaction, can now be seen in real time. We can set up push notifications with tolerances to say this particular attraction or slide is out of tolerance for what we believe. It allows you to drill in directly and see who we can overlay staffing to understand, is it a staffing training issue, or we can overlay weather to say, our dispatch is higher or lower given weather conditions. So all of these things become really, really important real-time information that is only really valuable in the time that it's happening. It doesn't do you any good from an operations standpoint to understand that your dispatch rate was really, really slow at the end of the business day. It's only valuable if you can do something about it to make sure that you're managing guest satisfaction most urgently. Now, on the right-hand side, this is an image from our strategy portal, and this is more like trend data. So what you're looking at here, albeit it looks a little bit small on my screen, hopefully it looks a little bigger on yours, but these are all entrances and exits over 2 seasons mapped against all the hours that a park is open. So this is, again, data from one of our customers, anonymized. But what you can see here is that the blue line is all entrances and the red line is all exits. So there's a couple of interesting data points here where you say there's a particular time of day where the exits are exceeding the entrances. You can see where the exits peak and the entrances peak. You can see there's another dip, significant dip just before the park actually closes. So now, why is this information valuable? Why see this as a trend? This is the type of information marketing might be interested in, or the food and beverage team might be interested in, or the general manager might be interested in. Because really, if you relate time in park to driving increased per caps, for example, well, maybe at that crossover point between entrances and exits, and it's a consistent time all the time, maybe what we need to do is we need to put some kind of food and beverage item on sale during that time and see if we can shift that axis between, or that crossover point between entrances and exits to the right, therefore keeping people at the park longer and increasing the chances that they're going to consume more food, more beverages, or those type of things. The other thing that's interesting to look at here is that if you look at late in the day, entrances or exits peak about 2 hours before the park actually closes. So, there's a couple of things to start to think about as the operations team here or as the marketing team. One thought could be, do we have a late day entrance ticket for the last 2 hours? And if we were to do that, we could actually track this graph over time to see, are we actually stealing full day entrances, full priced full day entrances for these after hours or for these late in the day entrances, or is it more? Could it be more valuable to actually just close the park then? And we can eliminate 2 hours of expenses of labor. We can eliminate 2 hours of all kinds of things, expenses that we are incurring for not very many people in our venue. So the idea here is that information that we are creating through the other two phases of this process, both collecting and analyzing, has value, but the value is time bound. And so you've got to figure out who needs what information when, and in what format do we need to distribute that so that they can achieve the most value out of all the work we're doing to collect and analyze and then distribute. So we've talked about sort of the three big trends and some ideas around those big trends, but how does this really become a superpower? So the way that this becomes a superpower from my perspective is that when you have this concept of a platform, which is this one location where you're going to collect and analyze and distribute information to and from, what you're really trying to do is create a virtuous cycle within your business. So whether it's the marketing team or whether it's the operations team, could be lifeguards if you're a water park venue, it could be a food and beverage manager. You're trying to create this virtuous cycle, which is you drive a bunch of guest experiences, you collect a bunch of data associated with those guest experiences and contextualize it with other information, which leads you to insights in which you iterate operations. Once you've iterated operations and you're driving new or differentiated or better guest experiences, you now have a new data set to compare against the old data set. And are you actually getting the results that you're looking for or not? Then you get a chance to iterate the operations again. But what you're doing is you're iterating operations intelligently according to how you're trying to drive the key metrics of your venue, whether that be a water park, an amusement park, a museum, a resort, any of those things. Every single one of them, every guest experience drives a little nugget of digital capability, which we can then collect, analyze, and distribute to the right people to help them understand how their venue is doing or how their segment of the venue is doing so that they can then iterate operations. And it's through this insight, not unlike the X-ray was able to impact all different aspects of the medical industry. It's through this kind of strategy and this kind of insight that your whole team who's responsible for the success of your venue can gain new insight to drive operations. So thank you very much. Remember, when you're thinking about your strategy, think about collection, think about analysis, and think about distribution. And now we're going to move to some Q&A with Franceen Gonzales. Franceen, thank you so much for joining us on the data conversation. It's a real honor to have you as part of my presentation. I'm really looking forward to some of the hard-hitting questions from the industry perspective. I know a lot. I bring a lot of technology background. You bring a lot of industry experience. So hopefully we can put together some great questions to add value to our listeners. So Franceen, maybe you could just start by introducing yourself.
Great. Thanks, Phil. First of all, a real honor to be here. As an industry person, I've always been very much interested in technology and science. And so I was really excited to be able to see data coming part of our industry, and really with the advent of Vantage and what you bring to the table. So I've been in the business now 30 some odd years. 5 years, and started off working in water parks, and I've worked in water parks throughout my career, whether it's water parks with theme parks, water parks with resorts, water parks with FECs. Water parks have been part of my life. So coming to WhiteWater, it was a very, very easy transition for me. So I've been with WhiteWater now for 7 years after a 30-year career operating water parks. And with that, having worked in a variety of different amusement industry venues, you get to see kind of how data could really apply in a lot of those cases. I used data quite a bit early in my career as a general manager of a water park in Phoenix. And I remember back in those days, it was really running a manual report and then tallying up all of the information into an Excel spreadsheet. But we've come a long way since then. As you know, I do a lot of stuff for the industry. So I get to see parks all over the world, and I'm really blessed to be able to do that. But with that, I get to see technology and its application, but sometimes the lack thereof. So I'm really kind of hoping in our conversation today that we get a chance to talk about how do we get started? How do we get started in putting data to work in our own businesses? So I was very excited to see your presentation. So you came from the tech industry, I've come from the amusement industry, and I've been kind of hammering about how do we transform the attractions industry? How do we get to that next level? And you keep mentioning the fourth industrial revolution and really the introduction of data. So what does that mean? What do you see? How can you foretell the amusement industry's future?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll start off by saying I do come from the technology in with only a year and a half of direct amusement park industry. So, Franceen, please keep me honest on the jargon front, because us technology guys tend to make technology maybe more intimidating by using a bunch of words we're comfortable with, but maybe they're not, as business savvy words as the operators and owners that are probably listening to this presentation. But when I think about the why now component of technology and what the opportunity in the amusement industry is, I really think about the enablement of technology as it relates to achieving relatively simple business goals. So, you hear about IoT, Internet of Things, which is a very jargon-oriented way of saying we can now turn very simple things into data gold mines. So think about in your life, you can go buy a fridge that's IP enabled that, if configured the right way, can order your grocery list for you when the milk gets to be a certain weight. So if you start to think about, what are the components inside your business, or what are the different kinds of attractions or behaviors that really give you the best insight into guest preferences or operational efficiency, those things can likely be somehow enabled with technology to give you a data stream that, before you made assumptions, now you can know real information out of those things. So, in with Vantage, for example, we made something as simple as a loyalty point gamification program that is linked to a dispatch process at the top of a water slide that feeds 4 different kinds of data within a water park. First of all, we get to understand guests and how many times they've ridden a specific ride. So we get to know popularity based on demographics. Second, we get to understand what behaviors are incented for those particular guests. So if we are offering X number of points to ride this ride, that ride, or are they actually just riding other rides that are their preferences? It drives a digital wait time capability, so it drives a whole algorithm in the background around how fast are people making it through queue lines, and therefore can we display digital wait time signs. And it gives operator information about dispatch rates that can be delivered in real time. So you can see just a simple enablement of a small device at the top of a water slide that a user clicks on with a wearable, all of a sudden ignites a plethora of data and information that can be used by so many departments within that just one water park context. So, the real key for me is if you truly understand your business, which most operators and business owners who have been in business for a long time do, the ability to enable those KPIs of what drives your business is really the secret behind turning this concept into reality.
And that is one of excited me the most. I know that as we worked with clients to bring this system to them and help them to, I kept thinking back, there was a time when we were looking at the casino business to say, what could we learn from the casino business that would apply in the attractions business? And one of the things they were doing really, really well was that they were understanding their customer. In fact, they were understanding a very specific customer, and that was the one that was spending the most money in their venues. So their loyalty programs with their little cards, that was the first way they were able to go in and track how much people were spending, and then making sure that those high rollers or those high spenders had the best rewards. Well, that enabled a whole bunch of extra spending in those venues, which made them very, very financially successful. So I'm curious, though, you keep talking about a platform, and I think that for us kind of focused on our operation, we're thinking about this very complicated system. What does the platform really consist of? Back for casinos, it was card readers and these magstripe cards. What kind of platform are you talking about when you talk about Vantage?
Yeah, great jargon call out, Franceen. Thank you. So, quite simply, when I think about a platform, what I think about is a system that is interested in more than just its own data. And what I mean by that is if you think about a ticketing system, they put the ticket at the core of everything that they do. Or you think about a food and beverage system, they put the food and beverage items at the core of what they do. Or a water quality system that thinks about just about the chemical treatments of water and what its current state is. Those are all applications or systems. What a platform does is it assembles all that information in one location. So when we think about Vantage as a platform, what we think about is, first of all, the missing element in the amusement industry from our perspective was any kind of system that put the guest at the center. So that was the opportunity that we saw to build Vantage. Put the guest at the center of everything that we do. Therefore, tickets, entitlements, retail items, access controls, those all just become attributes of the guest that's sitting in the middle. And from a platform perspective, what we do is we build a count around the guest, and then we access information that we build, in the water park context again, that we access the information that's been built. We're not a point of sale system today, but we integrate with the point of sale system so that that guest account can now understand access controls from the ticketing and point of sale system, but that it's an attached entitlement to that guest. So the notion of a platform is this ability to assemble all that data from these different systems within a park to give you a whole of your guest experience within the park. And then you can start to drive preferences, which allows you to start to market back against them, starts to help you understand who are your most profitable guests, what kind of guest personas stay at your park the longest. All these elements are you required to draw in all these different data elements from the different systems in your park into this platform to understand your guest at its core.
So then Vantage is really kind of the hub, and then which is built around the guest, and then all these other systems that many parks already have are the spokes, and they're collecting their data but driving it back to the hub so you understand your customer better.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. So in your strategy of systems, right, you've got a bunch of applications, you've got some platforms, and that's what designs your whole IT ecosystem to drive your park's success. So, but you need those platforms that are going to draw the data together to do the analysis components. As we talked about in the presentation, individual elements of data are not as valuable as data that can be merged with other pieces of data to really produce information and drive insight.
That's great. Well, I'm going to recall some of my old memories. I remember being the park director for Six Flags Hurricane Harbor at Great Adventure in New Jersey, and we had a very compressed season, less than 90 days. And so really, I spent a lot of my off season trying to prepare my team, prepare my park so that I can be perfect on day one. Because if you're not perfect on day one, you don't have a whole lot of time to make up that piece that's missing. But we also found is that we had to be pretty nimble, and that's hard. You want to create perfection and at the same time be really nimble because things happen, things change. And how are you able to be nimble in that kind of an environment? Well, really, it's about data. I used to scour through all of our reports so that I could pull out whatever trends I possibly could. That's just one person. How does the Vantage system do that for somebody so that they don't have to have a data scientist? They don't have to have somebody who's constantly there looking at the data.
Yeah, so you asked two really important big questions there. So let me address the last one first, and then I'll go back to the first one. So the last one is, we've talked a ton about data. We've talked a ton about information and analysis and distribution. We realize as Vantage that we're actually asking people to change the way that they run their business and how that they use data to run their business, or information for that matter. So, coming from the technology background, as you said, a very, very common feature of any business that runs a subscription-oriented business model is something called customer success. And so we have designed a whole department that is motivated to be a member of your team to help you understand and correlate and create reports and data for your park. So the idea here is we know that we are asking you to change the way that you do your business in order to use data, and we are bringing the resources to your team to help you actually do that. So the customer success manager from Vantage that's assigned to your team becomes an embedded member of your team, is a single point of contact to help build reports and distribute data and drive insights. And they're also your single point of contact related to any kind of warranty or support or new feature design. So we've on purpose designed the business to help people with this transformation into the fourth industrial revolution. Your second, and I've forgotten your first question. I knew I answered your second one first, but your first one was.
Well, just talking about how people have to be nimble every single day. So
Right.
how do you stay nimble?
Right. So, once that customer success manager is in place and we understand the key KPIs, we have to go back to the time value of that data. So remember in the presentation, we talked about, the most valuable time to find out that your flight is delayed or canceled is before you leave your home. It's the same idea. We've got to put the data in your hands, before this Q&A session, you were talking a lot about the, analyzing those reports in your past at the end of the day. That means you've lost a whole business day to actually do anything about changing the way that the business is running within the day. So the idea here is, with the advent of technology and mobile devices and apps and all these things, we can now put data in real time in people's hands so that they only have to wait minutes to make decisions rather than waiting to the end of the day when they analyze the data. So it's this delicate combination of not overwhelming, a new park with all these fancy technology things, but making it seamless into the workflow. A simple push notification to a mobile device to a lifeguard manager to say the dispatches on, the family raft ride is now out of tolerance, actually allows them to go investigate that particular issue before they get a customer complaint at the end of the day that says the queue line was 25 minutes to get onto the family raft ride. We never got to ride it. So the whole idea here is put more relevant information in the hands of your employees in real time.
Well, so that's fantastic. I think I really wish I could go back in time, and I wish I had this system at the time. But at the end of the season, I recall my times as a general manager. I'd bring my whole team together, and we would just spend several days just doing a kind of a debrief, download. We called it a postmortem. That's a little bit morbid, but it was a postmortem, and that told us what went right, what didn't go right, what could we do the following year, what do we need to prepare for, and how did we perform? And that postmortem was really pulling the stacks and stacks of reports that were written at the time. This is a long time ago, mind you, and I'm sure that there's lots of other technologies to be able to extract information. But that postmortem really kind of helped us for the following year. Your long term would help, I guess, in the same way.
And the mind shift that I would suggest this fourth industrial revolution enables is to move from the postmortem to the premortem. So the concept of the premortem is that heading into your season, you have a set of historical data that should tell you what to expect, given weather forecasts, given when holidays fall versus school breaks, versus all these things are experiences that you have, and over time data that we would track to allow you to preset up what you should expect from a KPI standpoint should be happening. The data and information can then be compared against those KPIs on a minute-to-minute basis. So, for example, if you know that the next week is 80 degrees and sunny and all kids in your region, and you're a localized park and all kids in your region or on summer holidays, you should expect to be maxing out attendance on Monday to Friday. But if you're not, we can actually tell you that in real time because we can set that KPI up ahead of time, given our experience. Then we can set tolerances inside the data collection that can then send push notifications that would say, hey, we would have expected 5,000 guests today, and it is noon, and we know that we only have 2,000 guests today. We're not going to meet our target. We can take immediate action rather than waiting to the end of the season and say, geez, that week that was 80 degrees and sunny, kids were on vacation, we didn't do as well as we thought. Why is that? So the whole idea here is to set up the pre-mortem instead of waiting all the way to the post-mortem, because when you pre-mortem your business model, you actually have an opportunity to change things in real time.
That's great. That's great. So, speaking of seasons, the 2020 an extraordinary season. And I keep thinking about kind of how things have shifted, how things are changing. The amusement business has really always been largely a volume-based model. It's how many people can you get into the park? How long can they stay? Can you keep them happy? And so now today with COVID, we're seeing that maybe those occupancies in those parks and those hotels and those resorts, it's lower because they just simply cannot have that many people there. So now the model's a little bit different. There are reports that people are seeing better per caps because they're really focused on that guest experience for those people that can come. It's less crowded. They can spend a little bit more time with their guests. So how does a system like this help you to enhance that guest experience, to have that guest experience be great from the time that they're booking their ticket to the time that they're leaving and going home? How would a platform like this help?
Yeah, it's a really good question and very timely. There's no question that COVID globally has created an enormous number of challenges, but challenges probably felt most in sort of the hospitality, amusement, airline industries, where you're talking about packing lots of people in together into tight spaces, which really goes against all of the COVID regulations. So, there's a couple of very specific things. Customer engagement is fundamental, as you said, to extending stays, extending per caps, but also understanding current capacities is also really important. So let's talk about guest engagement first, and then we'll go to operations second. So guest engagement, finding ways to engage your guests through a longer period of time is really critically important. So if you focus on just engaging your guests for their small amount of time in the park, you're probably missing those opportunities for re-engagements after they leave the park, and you're missing opportunities to pre-engage them to generate revenue before they even enter the park. So a couple of simple things from our platform's perspective. With all of our platforms comes the guest app. That guest app is downloaded often before your guests actually reach your park. And that's your first opportunity to engage them in a really meaningful way. Encourage them to set up accounts by offering them loyalty points. That can be distributed through electronic tickets or over through the App Store. Lots of different ways. But if you think about your opportunity to market to them early, getting them engaged with planning their day inside your venue before they even arrive is a great way to start to drive upsells. So for example, fill out your account, get a cabana at half off. You're not likely to sell all your cabanas anyway in a reduced capacity standpoint. Also, with that guest app, the way that we've driven it is we can deliver digital photos back into the guest app. So that means that there's an opportunity for them to revisit the guest app to view their photos of their day with their family after they've left the park. So these are just two really simple examples of how can you extend the time where you fill the consciousness as a venue in your guests' minds. You've got to find ways to get them engaged before they reach the park, so that they can plan and maximize the time that they've got their day inside your park. And then how do you get them to think about you after they've already left? This idea of guest engagement and extending the time in which they are consciously thinking about your venue is critically important in terms of making sure that you can remarket to them. The second piece on the operational side is with restrictions, and every jurisdiction is a little bit different. So I'll just talk to a couple of the experiences that we've had, certainly not suggesting that I fully understand how COVID's being managed globally around the world and all the different jurisdictions we operate in. But for many of our customers, they are in jurisdictions where reduced capacity is required. So, if the park's maximum capacity was 5,000 guests at any one time, they might only allow to be able to have 2,500. For most of the systems that are running inside these guest venues, they don't actually have the ability to understand how many people are actually in the park right now. So if it's only 4,500 people if it's only 1,500 people and you're allowed to have 2,000 people, you're actually missing out on 500 attendee opportunities to sell either last minute tickets or if you've got a lineup at the front. So first of all, operationally, truly understanding how many people are inside your venue at any one time in real time is actually quite difficult for most people who operate venues today. Then there's also the idea of social distancing around virtual queuing and understanding how many people can be in a queue versus the speed that people are moving through the queue and the time that people are coming down any kind of attraction. The capacity management components of the venues is also, once you're inside, you need to distribute people socially responsibly as well. And so understanding how to manage people within spaces or queue lines also is a digital exercise, especially if you have reduced guests, which means reduced revenue. You also don't want to over-index on labor because really that's just two forces working against each other in a negative fashion. So how do you start to use technology and platforms to help you manage all these scenarios without it being a manual of just adding more staff? And we've released a bunch of reopening strategies as Vantage. And we've also, outside of the amusement industry altogether, some of the location services capabilities that we have actually transitioned into contact tracing for non-amusement venues as well. So we're actually taking what we've learned and the technologies that we've developed to go into care homes and office settings to do health screening and contact tracing in those venues as well. So, COVID's been a real challenge for our industry in general. And it requires a new way of thinking to try and manage to these new realities.
Well, I'm mindful that not everybody has always a budget to this technology. There's a lot of really great examples of companies that have said, yes, we put a lot of technology in our rides and attractions, but now we're going to put technology into the systems that really support a guest experience and a safe guest experience. And safety and risk management is very, very core to what I've done for all of my career. I'm so glad to see that you have COVID tools, so to speak, so that people can maybe manage that better. But I'm also mindful that there's a lot of things that we can learn just by understanding our guest behavior and our guest movement and our employees and our employee movement. Are there any other kind of closing thoughts that you're thinking of in kind of how we achieve that fourth industrial revolution in our amusement industry? I think that the business is so diverse. There's FECs and there's museums and there's science centers and amusement parks and water parks and now shopping centers and cruise ships. But all of them are really based around, it's a location-based entertainment. You're in a venue and there's people that are coming for purposes of entertainment. Any closing thoughts and kind of what you see next?
Yeah, I think, if I think at sort of the macro level, I think what the amusement industry has done well, and amongst other industries as well, has done well, is started to understand and survey and gather data points. But in every instance, we're asking customers what they think. The best way, and if I go back to the Netflix example, is to observe your customers, what they're actually doing. Because what a customer tells you and what they actually do can often be two different things. And so I don't want to devalue the net promoter score concept or the surveying concept that people have, because that's a valuable data set in and of itself. But what I would really encourage you to do is think about how do you supplement observation to build a more complete data set of these two pieces together. And so if you just look at a guest, the way our technology works is the foundation of what a guest experiences has to do with an app on their on a mobile device, or they can interact with it through a kiosk, and a wearable. The wearable does two specific behaviors for us. One, it tracks active behavior, so we can create it, it can be used as a cashless device. It can be used to open lockers. It can be used to redeem gamified loyalty points. These are all active behaviors that we're using. But we also have a beacon in the inside that's tracking the passive behaviors of the guest in between their active time. So we can start to understand what are the paths that guests are taking through your venue. How can we use location services to enhance the experience so that your kids can go off and experience the kids area while you sit and have lunch or a beverage on your own, but you can feel safe that you can know where they are. These passive behaviors is really what the fourth industrial revolution has enabled with this whole idea of enabling IP technologies. So, the way that I would think about the opportunity that's ahead for us is that the data that we've collected so far has been valuable but incomplete. The opportunity to create a more complete guest persona and therefore enhance your understanding of the value of your venue exists through new technology enabled through the fourth industrial revolution.
It's fantastic. I'm so excited. I can't wait to go to a venue and be able to see those reports. I actually went to go see one of our venues, and it was awesome to walk into their operations office, and I could see their little handheld, and it had what their attendance was inside the park right then, and you could see it shifting as tickets were being sold and people were coming in, and as people were leaving, maybe going to the parking lot. That is just, it's the power of data. I think now is time for us to switch over to questions from our audience.
Yeah,
So
well, thank
so
you.
much.
Great questions, Franceen, and thank you so much.
Absolutely.